Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Stories. We're going to do Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. All right. This will be Chapter 1, The Old Sea Dog. The squire and the doctor have asked me to write all I remember of Treasure Island, from the beginning to the end. I am to put everything except where the island is located, for there is still treasure there, not yet found. I will go back to the beginning, to the time when my father owned the Admiral Benbow Inn. It was then that the brown old seaman with the scar across his cheek came to stay with us. I remember him as if it were yesterday. He came through the inn door with a large sea chest on a cart. He was a tall, strong, heavy man with nut brown skin. He had a greasy black pigtail that hung down onto his dirty blue coat. His hands were ragged with black, broken nails, and across his right cheek ran a saber-cut scar, a dirty, livid white. I remember him looking around the coastline and whistling to himself. Then he sang out in a high, cracked voice an old sea song. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum. He stared out at the cliffs and at our signboard. This is a handy cove. He said to my father, a good place for an inn. Do you have much business, mate? No, not much company, replied my father, which is a shame. Well then, he said, this is the place for me. I'm a plain man. Rum and bacon and eggs is all I want. And that room up top to watch for ships. You can just call me captain. And you'll be wanting these. He threw down 3 or 4 gold pieces on the table. Tell me when I owe you more. He spoke like a man who was in charge. His clothes were in bad shape, and he used rude language. Yet, he did not seem like a regular sailor. He seemed more like a commander that was used to being obeyed and would punish swiftly. He was a very silent man. All day he walked around the cove or out on the cliffs with a brass telescope. All evening he sat in a corner of the parlor next to the fire and drank strong rum and water. Mostly he would not speak, even when we spoke to him. He would just give mean looks and blow through his nose like a foghorn when anyone was around. Folks that stayed at the inn soon learned to leave him alone. Every day when he came back from his walk, he would ask if any of us had seen any seafaring men. At first, we thought he was just looking for some company and news of the sea. But when sailors did come to stay at the Admiral Benbow, he would peek through the curtain door before he would enter the parlor, and as always, as quiet as a mouse around them. By then, we had realized that he was indeed trying to avoid them. One day, he took me aside. He promised me a silver coin every month if I would only keep a secret. I was to watch and let him know if a seafaring man with only one leg appeared. Often, when I asked him for my silver coin each month, he would only blow through his nose at me and stare me down. Before the week was out, however, he would pay me and order me again to look out for the seafaring man with one leg. You can imagine how that one-legged man haunted my dreams. On stormy nights, when the wind shook the house and the surf roared up the cliffs, I would picture that one-legged man. First, the leg would be cut off at the knee, then at the hip. Then he was like a monster that only had the one leg, but in the middle of his body. To see him leap and run and chase me over hedges and creeks was the worst of nightmares. I was terrified of this one-legged man, but everyone else at the inn was afraid of the captain himself. He told dreadful stories about hanging and walking the plank and storms at sea and wild deeds in places of the waters of the Spanish Main. If he thought someone was not listening, he would slap his hand on the table for silence. His actions and his language shocked our guests. Many a time he would sit with his rum and sing his wicked wild sea songs. Then he would call for a round of drinks and force everyone in the room to listen to his stories or join him in a chorus. Our poor guests would tremble and join in for dear life. My father was always saying the inn would be ruined, for people would soon stop coming by. But I believed that our guests rather liked him. This was fine excitement in our quiet country life. Some of the younger men called him a true sea dog and a real old salt. In one way, however, he did ruin us. He stayed so many months that he owed us money, and my father was too afraid to ask him for it. He lived in terror of the captain. I'm sure this is what made my father sick and led to his early unhappy death. Only one time did someone cross the captain. My father was very ill, and Dr. Livesey came one evening to attend to him. Before he left, he waited in the parlor for his horse to be brought around. How different the neat, bright doctor looked from that filthy, heavy, blurry-eyed sea dog. Suddenly, the captain began to pipe up his song. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo ho ho, in a bottle of rum. Dr. Livesey did not seem impressed with his drunk, dirty singer. He kept talking to Taylor, the gardener, and the captain slapped his hand upon the table for silence. The voices stopped at once, all but Dr. Livesey's. He went right on speaking, clear and friendly. The captain glared at him, slapped his hand again, and glared still harder. Finally he roared, "Silence there, matey." "You're speaking to me, sir," said the doctor. "Aye, matey." "Well, then, I have only one thing to say to you, sir," replied the doctor. "If you keep on drinking rum, you will have a stroke and the world will be rid of a very dirty scoundrel." The captain sprang to his feet. He pulled out and opened a sailor's clasp knife. Dr. Livesey did not budge. He said very calmly, "Put that knife in your pocket this instant. If you do not, I promise upon my honor, you shall hang." The two men had a battle of looks, but the captain soon knuckled under. He put his weapon away and sat down, grumbling like a beaten dog. "Now, sir," said the doctor, "I'm not just a doctor. I'm a county officer. If I catch one word against you, I'll have you hunted down and forced out of this country." Soon after, the horse arrived and Dr. Livesey rode away. The captain held his peace that evening and for many evenings to come. All right, we're at chapter 2, y'all, the black dog. That winter was bitter and cold with long, hard frosts and heavy winds. My poor father was so ill that we feared he would not live to see the spring. Every day he grew worse. My mother and I had our hands full with the inn, and we paid very little attention to our rough guest. One January morning, a frosty gray morning, the captain got up quite early. He set out down the beach with his hat tilted back upon his head. His sword was swinging under his old blue coat, and his brass telescope was under his arm. I remember that his breath hung in the air like smoke as he walked off. Mother was upstairs with father, and I was setting the breakfast table. The parlor door opened and a man stepped in I had never seen before. He was a pale, flabby man missing 2 fingers on the left hand. He wore a short sword, but he did not look much like a fighter. I was on the lookout for a seafaring man with 1 leg or 2, and this one puzzled me. He did not look like a sailor, and yet he had a smack of the sea about him too. He sat down and asked for rum, but before I could go, he said, "Come here, sonny." I took a step nearer. "Is this here table for my mate Bill?" he snarled. "I don't know a Bill," I said. "I'm setting the table for someone who goes by Captain." "Does he have a cut on one cheek? On his right cheek?" "Ah, he has. Well now, is my mate Bill in this here house now?" I told him he was out walking. Which way, Sonny? Which way is he gone? I told him that the captain would return soon. Ah, he said he, Bill will very happy to be very happy to see me. I did not think this would be the case, but what could I do? The stranger kept hanging about like a cat waiting for a mouse. Ah, here's my old mate Bill now, he said after some time, with a spyglass under his arm. You and me will just go back into the parlor, Sonny. We'll give Bill a little surprise, we will. The stranger backed me into the parlor and hid behind the open door. I was very uneasy and alarmed, as you may imagine. The stranger had his hand on the hilt of his sword. At last, in walked the captain. He slammed the door behind him and marched straight across the room to where his breakfast awaited him. Bill, said the stranger in a bold voice. The captain spun round to face us, and he turned pale. He looked as though he had seen a ghost. I felt sorry to see him look so old and sick. Come, Bill, you know me. You know an old shipmate, Bill, surely, said the stranger. The captain made a short sort of gasp. Black dog. And who else? Said the man. Black dog? Come to see his old shipmate, Bill Bones, at the Admiral Benbow Inn. Ah, Bill, we've seen some times, us two, since I lost them 2 claws. He held up the hand missing the 2 fingers. Look here, said the captain. You found me. Here I am. So speak up. What do you want? I'll have a glass of rum from this dear child here, said Black Dog, and we'll sit and talk over old times. I brought in their rum and then retreated back into the parlor. I tried hard to listen in, but I heard only low mumbling. But at last the voices began to grow louder, and I could pick up a word or two, mostly curses from the captain. No, 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 and an end of it, he cried once. If it comes to hanging, hang all, say I. Then all of a sudden, there was a lot of noise, the chair and table went over, there was a clash of steel, and then a cry of pain. The next instant, I saw Black Dog run from the inn. The captain was right behind him. Both men had their swords drawn, and Black Dog had blood running down his left shoulder. At the door, the captain lifted his sword for one final blow, but his sword hit our inn signboard, and there it stuck. You can see the notch on our sign to this day, to be honest. That blow was the last of the battle. Black Dog disappeared over the hill in half a minute. The captain stood staring at the signboard like a confused man. He passed his hand over his eyes a few times. Then he turned back into the house. Jim, he said, bring me rum. He staggered a little and fell against the wall. Are you hurt? I cried. Rum, he repeated. I must get away from here. Rum, rum. I ran to fetch it, but I was very shaken. Then I heard a loud fall in the parlor. I ran back in and found the captain lying on the floor. At the same instant, my mother, who had heard all the noise, came running downstairs to help me. We raised his head. He was breathing very hard, but his eyes were closed. His face was a horrible color. Oh dear, cried my mother. What an awful thing to happen in our house, and your poor father sick upstairs. We had no idea what to do to help the captain. We were quite relieved when Dr. Livesey came in on his visit to my father. Oh, doctor, we cried, what shall we do? Where is he wounded? Wounded? Fiddlesticks, said the doctor. He's not wounded. The man has had a stroke, just as I warned him. Now, Miss Hawkins, go back upstairs to your husband, but don't tell him anything about this. I'll do my best to save this fellow's worthless life. The doctor ripped up the captain's sleeve to check his veins. The captain's arm was tattooed in several places. After a bit, the captain opened his eyes and looked about him. First, he recognized the doctor and gave him a frown. Then he looked at me. He tried to raise himself, crying, "Where's Black Dog?" "There's no Black Dog here," said the doctor. "You've had a stroke, just as I warned you. Come now, I'll help you to your bed." We managed to help him upstairs, and we laid him on his bed. "Now listen to me," said the doctor. "If you keep drinking rum, you'll die. Do you understand that? Die." And with that, he went off to see my father, taking me with him by the arm. "He should lie for a week where he is," he told me. "That is the best thing for him and you. But another stroke will kill him." All right, y'all, this is Chapter 3, The Black Spot. About noon, I stopped at the captain's door with some cool drinks and medicine. He was still lying in bed. He seemed weak but very stirred up. "Jim, my lad, did that doctor say how long I was to lie here?" "A week at least," said I, walking to him. "Thunder!" he cried. "A week! I can't do that. They'd have the black spot on me by then. But I'm not afraid of 'em. I'll find another place to hide, matey." As he spoke, he rose from bed, holding on to my shoulder. His grip almost made me cry out. Then he fell back, too weak to sit up. "Jim, you saw that there seafaring man today, Black Dog?" I asked. "Ah, Black Dog," he said. "He's a bad one, but the one-legged man is worse than him. Now, if I can't get away, and they give me the black spot, mind you, it's my old sea chest that they're after. You get on a horse, you can't you? Well then, you get on a horse and go to that dratted doctor. You tell him to gather up officers and bring them to the Admiral Benbow Inn. They'll find them villains here, all of Flint's old crew." He was growing more and more excited. I was worried that he would disturb my ill father, who needed quiet. "I was first mate," he went on. "Old Flint's first mate. I'm the only one that knows the hiding place. Flint gave it to me when he lay a-dying. But you won't tell any of this unless they put the black spot on me, or unless you see that Black Dog again, or a seafaring man with one leg. Jim, him above all." "But what is the black spot, Captain?" I asked. "That's an order, mate, to appear before 'em. I'll tell you if they put that on me, but you keep your eye open, Jim, and I'll share my loot with you, upon my honor." His voice grew weaker. After I had given him his medicine, he fell into a heavy sleep. I left him thinking about what he meant about a hiding place, the black spot, and Flint. I did not think about this for long. My poor father died quite suddenly that evening, and we became lost in our sorrow. All became a blur, with visits from neighbors, planning the funeral, and taking care of the guests at the inn. I had no time to think of the captain and his strange words. The captain got downstairs for breakfast the next morning, but he helped himself to rum and had a terrible temper. On the night before the funeral, he was in an awful state. It was shocking in our sad house to hear him singing away at his ugly old sea song. He did not speak to me, and I think he forgot what he had told me that awful night. He was very weak, but he still managed to climb the stairs. Sometimes he put his nose out of the doors to smell the sea. He seemed lost in his own world, filled with fears. So things passed until the day after the funeral. At about 3 o'clock on that foggy, frosty afternoon, I was standing at the door for a moment, full of sad thoughts about my father. I saw someone walking slowly beside the road. I knew he was blind, for he tapped a stick in front and wore a green shade over his eyes and nose. He was hunched over and wore a huge old tattered sea cloak with a hood. I never saw in my life a more dreadful looking person. He stopped in front of the inn and said into the air, "Will some kind soul tell a poor blind man where he might be?" "You are at the Admiral Benbow Inn at Black Hill Cove, my good man," said I. "I hear a voice," said he. "Will you give me your hand, my kind young friend, and lead me in?" I held out my hand, and the horrible, eyeless, soft-spoken creature gripped it hard. I was startled by the pain and tried to get free, but the blind man pulled me close up to him with a yank of his arm. "Now, boy," he sneered, "take me in to the captain, or I'll break your arm." He gave my arm a wrench that made me cry out. "Come now, march," he snarled. I never heard a voice so cruel and cold and ugly as that blind man's. I led him into the parlor where the captain was sitting, dazed with rum, lead me straight up to him, and cry out, "Here's a friend for you, Bill. If you don't, I'll wrench your arm." I was so terrified that I did as he told me. The poor captain raised his eyes. His face was filled with terror and sickness. He tried to stand, but he was too weak. "Now, Bill, sit where you are," said the blind man. "Hold out your left hand. Boy, take his left hand by the wrist and bring it near to my right." I saw him pass something from the hand that held his stick into the captain's palm. "And now that's done," said the blind man. At those words he suddenly let go of me and skipped out of the parlor and into the road. I could hear his stick go tap, tap, tapping into the distance. The captain and I were both dazed. Then slowly he opened his hand and looked sharply into the palm. "10 o'clock!" he cried. "6 hours from now? We'll lose them yet." And he sprang to his feet. His hand went to his throat and he began swaying. He let out an odd sound, then fell straight to the floor. I ran to him at once, calling to my mother, but it was too late. The captain had been struck dead by a thundering stroke. I had certainly never liked the man, but as soon as I saw that he was dead, I burst into a flood of tears. It was the second death I had known, and the sorrow of the first was still fresh in my heart. All right, y'all, we're on chapter 4, the sea chest. I told my mother all that I knew, perhaps too late. We knew at once that we were in danger. The captain owed us money, but we were afraid to search his room. If I rode to Dr. Livesey's for help, that would have left my mother alone and unprotected. Yet, we did not want to stay in the house. Every sound filled us with alarm. The coals falling in the kitchen grate, the very ticking of the clock. There were moments when I jumped in my skin for terror. We decided to go forth together and seek help in the nearby village. With no head coverings, we ran out at once into the foggy night. I was cheered to see the yellow candlelight in the windows of the village. That was the only cheer we were to feel. No soul would return with us to the Admiral Benbow. Several men were willing enough to ride to Dr. Livesey's, but not one would help us to defend the inn. My mother made them a speech. "If none of the rest of you dare, Jim and I dare. Back we will go to the way we came, and small thanks to you big, hulking, chicken-hearted men. We'll have that chest open if we die for it. I'll have the money that's owed to us. Someone gave me a loaded pistol in case we were attacked. One lady let us borrow a bag for the money if we found any. One lad was to ride to the doctor's in search for help, but that was all that came of our trip to the village. We slipped back along the hedges, noiseless and swift. Our hearts were beating fast, and we did not feel relief until the door of the Admiral Benbow had closed behind us. I bolted the door at once. We stood and panted for a moment in the dark. My mother got a candle. Holding each other's hands, we went into the parlor. The captain lay as we had left him, on his back with his eyes open and one arm stretched out. "Pull down the blind, Jim," whispered my mother, "and then we must get the sea chest key off that body." On the floor close to the captain's hand was a little round paper blackened on one side. It was the black spot. Written on the other side was, He had till 10, mother, said I. It's now 6. I felt in his pockets. All I found were a few small coins, a thimble, his knife, and a compass. Perhaps it's around his neck, said my mother. There, sure enough, we found the key. We were filled with hope and hurried upstairs to his little room. We knelt beside his sea chest. As my mother opened the chest, a strong smell of tobacco rose from inside. On top lay a suit of very good clothes. Next, we found some sailing tools, a small tin cup, sticks of tobacco, 2 handsome pistols, an old Spanish watch, and 5 or 6 curious seashells. These all lay on top of an old boat cloak, white with sea salt. Then we found the last things in the chest, a bundle of papers tied up in oilcloth, and a canvas bag that jingled of gold. I'll take what's owed to me, and not a penny over, said my mother. Hold the bag. She began to count out the coins. It took a while, for the coins were of different countries and sizes, doubloons, pieces of 8, and others all together. Suddenly, I heard the tapping of the blind man's stick upon the frozen road. It drew nearer and nearer while we sat holding our breath. Then it struck sharp on the inn door. We could hear the handle being turned and the bolt rattling. There was a long silence. At last, the tapping started again down the road until we could hear it no more. Mother, take all the coins and let's be going. I'll take what I have. She jumped to her feet. And I'll take this to even the count, I said. Picking up the oilskin packet of papers, we left the candle by the chest and felt our way down the stairs. Then we were out the door and running. We had not started a moment too soon. The fog was drifting off and the moon shone quite clear. Less than halfway to the village, in full moonlight, we heard footsteps running. My dear, said my mother weakly, take the money and run on. I am going to faint. Luckily, we were just at the little bridge. I helped her to the edge of the bank. Sure enough, she gave a sigh and fell on my shoulder. I do not know how I found the strength, but I managed to drag her down the bank and a little way under the arch of the bridge. So there we had to stay, partly hidden and within earshot of the inn. My curiosity was stranger than my fear. I crept back up and could see the road and our door. There I saw 7 or 8 men running hard. Pirates, I thought. A man with a lantern led the way. The next moment I heard the blind man's voice cry, Down with the door! Aye, aye, sir, answered 2 or 3. A rush was made upon the door, and they were surprised to find it unlocked. Again, the blind man's voice rang out, as if he were afire with rage. In, in, in! A few dashed in. One called out, Bill's dead! Search him, you lazy lubbers, and the rest of you, get the chest. I could hear their feet rattling up our stairs. The house must have shook with it. The upstairs window of the captain's room was thrown open and a man leaned out. Phew! He cried. Someone's been in the chest. Is it there? Roared Pew. The money's there. Forget the money. Flint's papers, I mean. We don't see it here, replied the man. It's that boy. I wish I had put his eyes out, cried blind Pew. Scatter, lads, and find 'em. I could hear the sounds of the house being searched and torn apart. Then, from over the hill, came a distant whistle. There's the signal, said one. We'll have to move, mates. Move my eye, cried Pew. That boy can't be far. Scatter and look, dogs. Oh, shiver my soul, he cried. If I had eyes. Hang it, Pew. We've got the gold, growled one. They might have hid the thing, said another. Take the gold, Pew. Don't stand here storming. While they quarreled, another sound came from the top of the hill. The tramp of horses galloping and a pistol shot. The pirates turned at once and ran in every direction. No one remained but Pew, tapping up and down the road, calling out, Johnny, Black Dog, Dirk, you won't leave old Pew, mates. Not old... You won't leave old Pew, not, mates. Not old Pew. Just then 4 or 5 riders swept at full gallop down the hill. Pew turned with a scream and rolled into the ditch. He was on his feet again in a second and made another dash. But he was so confused, he ran and fell right under the nearest horse. The rider tried to save him, but it was too late. Down went Pew with a cry that rang high into the night. He fell on his side, then gently rolled face down and moved no more. I called out and soon saw who the riders were. One was the boy who had gone from the village to Dr. Livesey's. The rest were officers on their way to investigate a ship docked in Kit's Hole. Pew was dead, stone dead. As for my mother, we carried her up to the village. A little cold water and smelling salts soon brought her back again. I told the whole story to the Chief Officer Dance. I went back with him to the Admiral Benbow and found it in a state of smash. I could see at once that we were ruined. They got the money, you say? Well then, Hawkins, what were they after? More money? No, sir, not money. Not money, I think. In fact, sir, I believe I have the thing in my pocket. And to tell you the truth, I would like to get it somewhere safe. To Dr. Livesey's, I thought. To be sure, boy. Quite right, he said. And I should report Mr. Pew's death to Dr. Livesey or Squire Trelawney. I'll take you along. I thanked him and we walked back to the village where the horses were. I told my mother where I was off to. Then I got up behind one of the officers and we began down the road to Dr. Livesey's. All right, y'all, we're on Chapter 5, The Treasure Map. When we reached Dr. Livesey's, the maid told us that the doctor had gone to Squire Trelawney's to dine. We rode to the grounds of the Squire and were admitted warmly at the grand hall. A servant led us into the library where the 2 men sat on either side of a bright fire. The Squire was a tall, stout man over 6 feet high. He had a rough and ready face and a look that said he was better than others, or thought he was. Come in, Mr. Dance, he said. Good evening, Mr. Dance, said the doctor with a nod. And good evening to you, friend Jim. What good wind brings you here? Mr. Dance stood up straight and stiff and told the entire story. The 2 men hung on every word. When they heard how my mother went back to the inn, the Squire cried, Bravo! And said, So, Jim, said the doctor, you have the thing that these pirates were after, have you? Here it is, sir, said I, and gave him the packet. The doctor looked it all over as if his fingers were itching to open it. Then he put it quietly in the pocket of his coat. Squire, said he, Mr. Dance, of course, must be off to his duties. I will keep Jim Hawkins here to sleep at my house. But first, he must eat. A cold meat pie was brought in, and I had a hearty supper, for I was as hungry as a hawk. While I ate, the Squire and the doctor bid farewell to Mr. Dance and closed the door behind him. And now, Squire, said the doctor. And now, Livesey, said the Squire in the same breath. One at a time, laughed Dr. Livesey. You have heard of this Flint, I suppose. Heard of him, cried the Squire. He was the most bloodthirsty pirate that sailed. Blackbeard was a child compared to Flint. But did he have any money? Asked the doctor. Money, cried the Squire. That's all these villains lived for. Suppose that I have here in my pocket some clue to where Flint buried his treasure. Will that treasure amount to much? Amount, sir, cried the Squire. It would amount to this. If we have the clue you talk about, I'll get a ship ready in Bristol dock. I'll take you and Hawkins here along, and I'll have that treasure if I search a year. Very well, said the doctor. Now then, if Jim agrees to it, we'll open the packet. He laid it before him on the table. The bundle was sewn together, and the doctor cut the stitches with his medical scissors. It contained 2 things, a book and a sealed paper. First of all, we'll try the book, said the doctor. The Squire and I peered over his shoulder as the doctor went through the book. It was filled with nearly 20 years of notes, dates, and strange markings. Here and there was a sum of money along with several crosses and place names. Under the sum on the last page was written, "Bones, his pile." "I can't make head or tails of this," said the doctor. "The thing is as clear as noonday," cried the squire. "This is an account book. These crosses stand for the names of ships or towns that they sank or plundered. The added up figures are the scoundrel's share." Right you are, I believe," said the doctor. "A thrifty man, not one to be cheated." "And now," said the squire, for the other. The paper had been sealed in several places. The doctor opened the seals with great care, and there fell out the map of an island. It was clearly marked with latitude and longitude, water depth, names of hills and bays and inlets, everything that would be needed to find it and safely anchor a ship there. It was about 9 miles long and 5 across. It had 2 fine harbors and a hill in the center part marked Spyglass Hill. There were 3 X's marked in red, 2 on the north part of the island, 1 in the southwest. Next to this last X were the words, "Bulk of Treasure." Over on the back was written, "Tall tree, spyglass shoulder, bearing a point to the north of northeast. Skeleton Island, east-southeast, and by east, 10 feet. The silver bars are in the north spot, near the east hill, 10 fathoms south of the black crag with the face on it. The weapons are easy to find in the sand hill, north, point of north, inlet cape, bearing east and a quarter north. Signed, J. Flint." That was all, but it filled both men with delight. "Livesey," said the squire, "you will give up your medical practice at once. Tomorrow I start for Bristol. In 3 weeks' time, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 10 days, we'll have the best ship, sir, and the choicest crew in England. Hawkins shall come as cabin boy. You, Livesey, are ship's doctor. I am admiral. We'll take my servants, Redruth, Joyce, and Hunter. We'll have a quick passage and no trouble finding the spot. And we'll have money to eat, to roll in, to play with ever after." "Trelawney," said the doctor, "I'll go with you. So will Jim. There's only one man I'm afraid of." "And who's that?" cried the squire. "Name the dog, sir." "You," replied the doctor, "for you cannot hold your tongue. We are not the only men who know of this map. These fellows who attacked the inn are after this map and the treasures. None of us should be alone until we get to sea. Jim and I shall stick together in the meanwhile. You'll take Joyce and Hunter when you ride to Bristol. And from first to last, not one of us must breathe a word of what we've found." "Livesey," returned the squire, "you are always right. I promise I'll be as silent as the grave." I lived on at the squire's hall with Tom Redruth, the squire's gamekeeper. Squire Trelawney was hard at work in Bristol finding a ship and a crew. Dr. Livesey had to go to London to find a doctor to take his place in the village. This all took longer than we had planned, and I often felt like a prisoner with old Redruth. My days were full of sea dreams of strange islands and adventures. I thought about all the markings I could remember from the map. I would sit by the fire and picture that island. In my mind, I explored every part and climbed the tall hill called the Spyglass. Sometimes we fought with savages, sometimes dangerous animals hunted us, but nothing I could dream up would ever be as strange or as awful as what our real adventures turned out to be. So the weeks passed on, till one fine day there came a letter from the squire. Redruth opened it and read it aloud. The squire had found a ship called the Hispaniola. She was at anchor, ready to sail. She weighed 200 tons. He wrote that his friend Mr. Blandley was very excited about our hunt for treasure. "Oh no," I said. "The squire has been talking." The letter went on to say that he had hired a sea cook His name was Long John Silver, and he had lost a leg while serving in the Royal Navy. This cook helped him find a good, tough crew of old salts. Mr. Blandley found us a captain, a stiff man, but a good man. And Long John Silver found a first mate for us by the name of Mr. Arrow. The good ship Hispaniola was ready to sail. A few final notes. I was to go with Red Ruth and spend one night with my mother to say goodbye. Then we were all to come as soon as we could. Lastly, Mr. Blandley promised to send a search party if our ship did not return by August. Imagine my excitement. The next morning, Red Ruth and I set out for the Admiral Benbow. My mother was in good health and glad to see me. The inn had been repaired and painted, thanks to the squire. He had even hired a boy to help my mother while I was gone. And this made me realize that I was truly going away. I had a few tears. The next day, I said goodbye to my mother and the cove where I had lived all my life. I thought of the old captain, how he had walked this beach with his drooping hat and his brass spyglass. Then we were on our way.